Jerry Maynard, I'm a council member at large, representing all of Davidson County. I appreciate your support. Without you, I would not have won, both in 2007 and in 2011, got reelected. And so I am the only African American elected countywide in the Metro Council. We have two judges that are there, as well as Howard Gentry, who serves as a clerk, as well as Brenda Wynn, who also serves as a clerk. And so we are making progress. When I got elected, I was the only African American elected countywide. We no longer can say that. That is a good thing. That is a great thing. We continue to make progress here in this city. Let me just speak to you briefly. I wrote a book called How to Lead When No One Follows. And of course you all know that you can't lead if nobody's following. And yet we see that we do this every day. We lead when no one is following. And we try to lead a group of people who may not be engaged, who may not understand what's happening. They may not even understand what's going on, because we know that when we go to the General Assembly, we don't have a whole lot of lobbyists representing our institutions. Can I have somebody say amen? Amen. University of Tennessee has 7 lobbyists. Vanderbilt has 3. They're there every day representing their interests at the General Assembly. And so we see that when I go to Metro Council meetings, we don't have hardly any African Americans coming down saying this is what's in the interest of our community, this is what's in the interest of our schools, this is what's in the interest of what's going on. However, we have other institutions and other communities, their lobbyists are there every time we meet. They're there shaking our hands, they're fellowshipping, developing relationships. Why? Because they're representing the interests of their community or their constituents. So we are leading all the time. I don't want to talk about for just a few moments and then I'll be finished. In 2012, President Barack Obama, who I love, supported, gave money to, raised money for, a campaign. I've been involved in politics for 25 years. Love him to death. So happy that he won in 2012. So happy that he won in 2008. Exciting time. But I want to deal with some facts. In 2012, Barack Obama won. And in 2008, he won. In 2008, here in Nashville, Tennessee, we had a record 67% of all registered African Americans voted in 2008. In 2008, 67% of all registered African Americans voted in the election in 2008. That is exciting. It is tremendous. It is awesome. However, let's then fast forward to 2011, where we have a school board race, or 2012 rather, August, where we have a school board race. And in that school board race, we have an African American woman who is a chair of the school board. She is working on her PhD, has her master's, has been a principal and a teacher, loves the children, has made fantastic progress. Performance are going up in our tests. Performance is going up in our schools. She has a balanced approach between public and charter schools. She is a great leader for our school board, African American, 2012, up for re-election. 67% of African Americans who are registered to vote voted in 2008. School board race comes up. 70% of our children in our public schools are people of color. Let me say that again. 70% of our children in public schools are people of color. Yet when we had the election in 2012 for our school board, guess what was the percentage of African Americans that voted in that election? 7%. 7% of African Americans who are registered to vote voted in the school board election that impacts 70% of the student body of our public schools that look like us. We went from 67% to 7%. And guess what? The chair of the school board, who was the first African American woman to be chair, got beat. She lost by less than 300 votes. You know why? Because in her district, 7% of African Americans who are registered to vote voted. I contend in my book, I love Barack Obama, but I contend in my book that the school board race is more important than the presidential race. I hope you disagree. I hope you buy the book. It's $10 each. Reason why. And I would love to have a conversation with you about which election is more important. I worked with the school board races, and I raised money, and I campaigned, and I went to the community, and I said, You all have to understand this race is just as important as the one that's coming up in November. Because this, you will meet your school board member, you'll meet your judge, you'll meet your council person, you'll meet your mayor, you'll meet your clerk, way before you meet the president. And let me tell you something, as much as I love Meharry, the council is going to be more important than Meharry.
That's right.
Let's just be honest about it. The mayor right now is more important than Meharry, than the president. And if we don't influence the mayor and influence the council, if we don't get involved in local politics the same way we get involved in national politics, we will continue to be left behind. So let me sound the alarm. I came here to sound the alarm. You know how we preachers are. We're going to sound the alarm, amen? We're going to sound the alarm. Let me sound the alarm. I promise he gets up on the third day. He gets up. But let me put him in the grave. Number one, we've had more elected officials who are African Americans over the last 30 years than in the history of this country. We have more black governors, more black state senators, more black state representatives, more mayors, more local officials throughout the nation over the last 30 years. Historic numbers since the Civil Rights Movement, beginning in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and the 60s. We've had tremendous success in getting people who look like us elected. My theme is always this: if you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu. So you have to be at the table. The problem is that who's been at the table? And just because they look like us doesn't always mean that they're effective. So I look at this way. We've had more elected officials. Thank the Lord. Progress. That is progress. Here's a problem. When you look at prison incarceration rates among African American men and women, they are higher now than they were 30 years ago. If you look at high school dropout rates among African American males, it is higher now than it was 30 years ago. If you look at Nashville, Tennessee, in our public schools, almost 50% of African American males drop out of high school before the 12th grade. If you look at healthcare disparities among blacks and whites, and you look at the disparity, it's worse now than it was 30 years ago. If you look at HIV and AIDS, cardiovascular disease, come on somebody, hypertension, diabetes, we're worse now than we were 30 years ago. If you look at the unemployment rate among African Americans now here in Nashville, this is still in Nashville, it's higher now than it was 30 years ago. You say, but brother man, how you doing? I looked and went to look at the data, and I looked at the unemployment rate 30 years ago versus now. If you look at African American men in Nashville, unemployment rate is at 30%. Sound the alarm. So just because you have elected officials does not translate automatically into progress. And so my book looks at the issue. So let me tell you an example, and then I'll be quiet. I don't look and say, okay, Jerry Maynard is this guy who sits on the mountaintop and looks down at the valley low, and my God, what's wrong with those people? No. I look and say, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And I want to tell you what inspired me to write this book. I've been a community activist. I call it Raising Hell. I've been a hell raiser for a long time. And before, I used to thought it was a white man. I said, oh my God, racism, just keeping us down. And, let me give you a great example. Give a great example. I was on my radio program about at that time, Mayor Purcell, on my radio show. And I said, Mayor Purcell, you just spent $3 million of federal dollars in the Gulch area, and those grants that come from HUD are supposed to go to pockets of poverty. And it's supposed to benefit the residents of that pocket of poverty. And the residents that you utilize to get that grants come from North and South Nashville. And yet the development, the $3 million you just spent, will not benefit those residents in North and South Nashville. So I began, and I was like, oh my God, this is horrible, this is horrible. And so I began to really cry out and cry out. And then I got elected. And when I got elected, okay, all right, it's time. Boy, I'm here now. Yeah, y'all should have let me in. This is hey, and you realize that it's us. I'm sleeping with the enemy.